Hello and welcome back to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, how to spend it. I am Andy Green.
I'm Philly Schultz.
Wherever I call you, Felix, on some sort of long journey to Mount Doom to destroy a ring of sorts.
Yeah. Who would you be in Lord of the Rings? Have you watched the movies? Have you read the books?
I've watched the movies.
Sure.
Got to be Frodo.
Do you? Oh, mate.
Who's the character to be in Lord of the Rings?
Oh, it depends. I think it's one of those things that tells you a lot about you. I don't know if you're Sam.
Who do you want to be?
Yeah, I don't know. It says a lot. Like, do you want to be like the egotistical hero and go with Aragorn, or do you want to sort of, or Frodo, or do you want to be the supporting guy? Classic 2IC and go with Sam. Or Gandalf. Gandalf's pretty cool.
Or who did Orlando Bloom play? Legolas.
Legolas, yeah, that's a pretty good choice.
Yeah, he'd be cool. He's a good choice. Yeah,
we could go for the two vaguely Irish hobbits. Dominic.
No,
do you know the ones that are just party boys?
You know who the best one was Sean Bean's character, Boromir.
Oh, Boromir.
He was the fucking yeah, he was good.
That says a lot about you snake. Yeah. Do you know what? Before we should have asked today's guest this question. I reckon he would have had a very good answer for
it. Do you think?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe we can message him. Do you want to know who today's guest is?
I do.
It's the one and only watch reviewer par excellence, Tim Mosso. He's on.
Wow,
yeah.
What a guest!
What a
big name in watches.
I mean, the dude has forgotten.
He's like an ultra marathon runner.
He is. He's forgotten more about watches than we have ever learned, I suspect. It's like, I don't know. I think, yeah. Really interesting stuff. Yeah, really interesting, like how we got into it.
He's coming on for a big chat. Mm-hmm. Before he comes on, Felix, you've been up to things, or what are they?
Just watching The Lord of the Rings on repeat. No,
is that
no. I've been following a little story that's been happening in the last week or so about a mysterious sculpture that appeared in Utah. But was it a sculpture? Was it aliens? Who knows? Are you across this?
I am. Looks like a big USB.
Well, I mean, it's made of stainless steel, and there's a couple of sheets of it that have been riveted together, and it's stuck in the earth in Utah. It's about 10 feet tall. And it was spotted by some scientists that were doing tracking sheep populations from a helicopter. So they spotted it in like the Badlands of Utah, and they went and checked it out. And no one is entirely sure what it is, or how it got there, or how long it's been there. And I'm a big sucker for this sort of thing. Like, you remember when we talked about that dude that left treasure?
Yeah,
Fenn's treasure. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
So
there was some closure to that case. Actually, I
think we talked about it. Point. I think we sort of mentioned.
I think we had the closure. Yeah, did we? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think we did. Pretty sure we did. It's something I wouldn't forget. Given that I found it. No, so this thing, it's in like quite a hard to reach part of like Utah. So like the park rangers or whatever that are responsible for that said, we're not telling you where it is. Don't go there. There's a good chance you will die if you're not prepared. And naturally, people have worked out where it is because of Google Maps and stuff, like Google Earth, and people have gone there because they're idiots.
Yeah,
but one of the theories is that they think it's actually been there for quite a long time, and it's amazing that no one's found it up until now. It just sort of goes to show that there are still like properly remote parts of the world. And the theories are that it's sort of a like situational art, maybe like someone like John McCracken and his estate have come out and said, no, it's not him, but it could be a follower. It's just cool. I like this sort of stuff.
We can tell. Yeah. We can tell. All right. Well, what have I been up to? Glad you asked.
Maybe hang on. I wasn't finished. You just cut in there like the Boromir.
You've got more?
No, I was just going to say. I was just going to bring it back in and say maybe it's full of steel Rolexes.
That's the lost shipment.
So Andy, what have you been liking?
So glad of you to ask. So what have I been liking? Well, I've been up to things. I've also been liking things.
Oh yeah, nice. Hit me.
What's been keeping me entertained is Rick Astley on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel, which I told you about the other day, where he does a lot
Who's
of
Rick Astley
covers.
for a quick primer on maybe the younger audience listeners?
I mean, the kids will know. Famous for the Rick roll. Rick Astley had the song. Probably was like a one-hit wonder, I guess, in like the 70s or 80s. Never Gonna Give You Up.
How does it go? Can you sing it a little bit, like under 15 seconds, so we don't have to pay
I'm
any
not going to
license?
sing at all.
Never gonna give her up. That one?
Yeah, which became a whole concept of Rick rolling. But anyway, he's embraced YouTube and he's doing covers of like just Foo Fighters, Post Malone,
Nice.
Sia.
Dude can sing.
I mean, watch them. We'll link them up, and you can watch them, and you can sing better than I can.
Yeah.
But it's just entertaining to watch. Now,
Okay.
what have I been up to? Well, I've just released a review on the new Tag Heuer Acro Racer X Bamford limited edition. Bit of a collab. So I had that watch for about a week, maybe like 2 weeks before it came out. Had a good run with it. To kind of help with the launch, and I decided to do a review. So that 600-word review that I turned into Instagram stories. So
wow, what a modern concept! Meet the people where they're at.
Don't even need a website anymore, guys. Watch out. But I've highlighted the whole review, so you'll be able to go to my Instagram and you can kind of read my thoughts
in
and
your
see
highlights.
my pictures.
Nice.
In my highlights.
What's the top line? Give me 25 words or less. What do you think? And just, what is the watch if people haven't seen it?
Okay, so it's an Acro Racer. It's in titanium,
Yep.
which pushes the price up a couple of grand. So it's 5,650 Aussie dollars, limited to 1,500 pieces. So titanium case, titanium bracelet, black dial with sort of concentric circles that start in the middle and go all the way out.
Yep.
There's like an orange track around the flange, orange hands.
Orange bezel pip looks cool.
Orange bezel pip looks cool, and then sort of bright blue Superluminova.
Right.
Very cool watch, very light, very breezy. One thing that I struggled to articulate a little bit was just how light on it was. Okay, Felix. I've got nothing. No, so it's entering summer here, and it's one of those watches that feels sort of cool on, and I think it's to do with the use of titanium and the way that it conducts temperature.
Yep.
Like I know that it doesn't take on or let out heat, something like that. But it just, like I was curious after wearing it around. I'm like, this thing is very light, so I weighed it, and the whole watch with all the links weighed like 136 grams, so very light. Sort of 43 millimeter watch,
and that's it. Like it's a big watch, and like I had the Tag Heuer that was titanium, and that was the same sort of deal. Like you think it's going to weigh you down, but it feels really nice on the wrist. So yeah, well, I've got my last question
for
you.
Finishing, yeah.
Would you cop it?
Yeah, I actually did think about it while I had it, because obviously I had the prime opportunity. Obviously, it's a limited edition. It's probably going to sell out, and I imagine quite soon, because the response has been great. I did think about it just because of how cool it is, and it's got this like titanium with like sandblasted finishing to it.
Yep.
I love the orange. I love the black. It's just a cool looking watch. That's why I wanted it. Obviously, it's larger, but being so light, I think it's manageable for me.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's probably a good thing you didn't cop it, because we've got to talk about Christmas, of course. So maybe we should talk about some Christmas gift options.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's take a break. This episode is brought to all of you by Gucci. Thank you, Gucci. Last few weeks we've been focusing on the grip. We're doing something potentially a little bit different. We're doing some gift giving. We're going to hop onto Gucci.com from the comfort of our home offices, respectively.
Yeah, sure.
And we're gonna pick out some gifts. Some Gucci gifts.
Yep.
So we're gonna pick a gift for each other.
Okay.
And we're also gonna have a look around for a gift for someone else.
Nice. Double gifting.
Yeah, spending.
Nice. Well, before we get into that, I'm sure you have been too, because I've been checking out a little bit of Gucci on the old social media and the internet, using the hashtags, all that sort of stuff.
Big time.
And I've been getting some ads in my feed for a new campaign that Gucci has promoting the grip, which, as I'm sure you all are aware, having listened to the last several episodes, is a gender-neutral watch design, and it's inspired by the world of skating. So cleverly, they've been promoting the grip using a series of portraits and videos of street sports athletes from around the world, including roller skaters, basketballers, breakdancers, and
Ooh.
naturally skateboarders,
Mm.
in their sort of very, very cool editorial style. And they have featured someone named Leo Baker, who is a non-binary American professional skateboarder and activist. They've also got New York's Paperboy Prince, who's a basketball player as well as a rapper. They've also got Brad Elterman, who documents pop, punk, and rock bands in Hollywood. Have you seen this
Yeah, it's a
campaign?
cool mix. I have. I mean, I sent it to you, so I have definitely seen it.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Just gaslighting you on it. No, it's a very cool. It's a very cool campaign. I have noticed, and maybe it's because we've sort of been spending so much time on Gucci.com, but I really do like how they're sort of positioning the grip. It is.
Yep.
It's a fun watch. It's a cool watch. It's meant to be sort of worn in that vein. So to see it sort of out and about, and I mean, I love the genderless thing. I think that's just perfect. I think it's very, very cool.
What I like about it is, and it's Gucci. Let's make no mistake, is a giant company. Like they're huge, but they can still push a little bit of politics. Like around they're shining a light on some areas that they can. Like they're using their influence to in a positive way to a small degree. So that's good, getting some representation from people who otherwise typically more marginalized in our community.
100%.
Let's get on to some prezzies, Andy Green.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Yeah, you kick things off. You're buying me a present, right?
I am. And spoiler alert, I've bought you 2 presents.
Oh, you're so generous. What are
know.
we starting with?
Look, there were some options. But because you're Andy Green and because it's OT the podcast, I went with a watch.
Oh, thank you.
Because I've well and truly sold myself on it, I went with a Gucci grip for you. But not any Gucci grip. No gold PVD for you. No black. No roulette wheels. I have gone for a pink Andy Green special inspired Gucci grip in steel.
Oh, love that.
Yeah, so I've just sent you the picture. Can you see that?
Beautiful. So it's the 38mm grip. Everywhere that there's like the Gucci kind of interlocking G logo, as well as sort of those famous kind of horizontal lines, and the date wheel, the time wheels.
Yeah,
it's all pink.
It's all pink. It's all like a hot pink, I would say.
That's
something, isn't
wheelhouse.
It? The bad news is you might have to wait a little bit of time because it's on back order at the moment.
No, you can see why.
It's so cool, and also,
hey, this is pink loom, by the way.
Oh, is it? Mate, I didn't even know that.
Glad you researched my gift so well. It's pink loom.
Honestly,
do you know what color it goes?
I saw the pink and I'm like, boom, Andy.
Done. Do you know what color it goes?
Pink?
Green.
Oh, no.
Mic drop.
And
ship it in.
The other good news is, because it's $2,630, that left me with some money from my hypothetical $3,000 hypothetical budget to buy something else.
Oh, what'd you get me?
Got you a little ring.
Thanks.
Little pinky ring, little signet ring. Double G's, of course, for green.
Yeah, natch.
Green. Also inlaid with green.
Oof.
But you know why I got this for you?
Why?
Because it's $365. Do you know why that's important?
Why?
Because you're working every day, Andy Green.
Yeah, working hard to make a living.
Working hard to make OT the thriving success that it is. So thank you very much for that. You'll be receiving those in the post, courtesy of Gucci's secure shipping service. Maybe you won't.
I've got something for you.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Guess what?
What?
Got you a grip as well.
Oh, yeah, cool. What'd you get?
Same size, 38mm.
Oh, Andy.
But with, they call it lime, but to me it looks blue. Lime on the face, dial and bracelet. Basically everywhere you see the interlocking Gs.
Yep.
It glows as well. And it's a lovely light blue when it's not lime. So that's the main one.
We would make quite a pair walking down the promenade in these watches. Can I just say?
Especially in the nighttime with the loom. I love the loom and the bracelet. I want to see this watch. Also on back order, I'm sorry. So it's $2,630 as you mentioned.
Nice.
But look, order it now, get it for Christmas, or maybe
Hopefully.
slightly after.
Yep,
Don't know.
sure.
Again, so I thought, well, I'll get you a placeholder gift just in case.
Nice. You're copying all my ideas, huh?
That's maybe I did, or maybe I'd filled out all of this first. So I'm getting you a money clip with silver interlocking G's for all the fat stacks that you're bringing in.
I've got some bad news for you.
You're cashless, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well,
business cards, though. OT business cards. We've got to print them up.
But yeah, given that you've got so much paperless money laying around, why don't we extend the gift giving to some significant people in our lives?
Ooh, shall I go first or shall you go first?
Yeah, you go first. Who are you getting something for, and what are you getting them?
I'll get them for my my partner, the mother of my child. It's Christmas. Christmas is a special time.
She deserves it. She puts up with you.
True.
Yep.
So I thought I'd check out Gucci's jewelry section,
Mm-hmm.
and I initially looked in the silver jewelry, and there is. I'm quite a fan of the old Ouroboros. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, Andy Green. An Ouroboros is a snake eating its own head, tail.
Okay.
It's a classic
Deep
Gucci
cuts.
motif, and I found a brooch.
Did you?
This is from the description for said brooch. Playful animal motifs that recall the illustrations found in children's storybooks influence details and designs throughout the Fall-Winter 2020 collection. The dog is made in pink resin with embroidery and a three-dimensional effect. A small double G subtly references the house logo. Pieces with versatile ways to wear and style embrace each person who is part of the house's individual spirit. I'm a sucker for a playful animal motif, Andy, as is my partner. So I have gone for the stunning pink embroidered dog brooch. Looks a bit like a poodle to me. $755. What do you reckon?
It's perfect. I'm more of a cat man, but I can appreciate it.
Yeah, I didn't see any cats. Next year.
No, not yet. Maybe 2021 collection, guys. And if it comes out.
Who are you buying for, Andy?
I'm going to get Mother Green something.
Mother Green.
And she's very good to me. So
she
I dip straight into the fine jewelry.
I mean, if you put up with me, I can't imagine what she has to deal with.
I mean, I was quite the child. I dipped straight into the fine jewelry section.
Nice. Fine.
Mighty fine. And also the silver jewelry collection. Got to get her something nice. So the first thing that sort of stood out to me was a silver necklace with the interlocking G's hanging down. I thought that was a pretty good choice, but then something caught my eye.
Quick question though, can I interrupt?
Mm-hmm.
Has your mum got street cred?
My mum's, she's got cred.
She owns the streets.
Local streets, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, nice.
People know who she is.
Yep.
They give way. Let's just say they give way.
Nice.
They let her through. They yeah.
Okay.
But then something sparkly caught my eye, and I completely lost track of the necklace.
Yep.
Bracelet. It is a double G bracelet with multi-color stones. It's like a rainbow for your wrist in a bracelet, not watches that we always talk about, but in a bracelet. So it's got the whole rainbow going around.
Nice. And it's gold.
$2,015. So say it's been a good year apparently.
Maybe at the OT Christmas party, Mother Green would be interested in a brand new, barely worn Gucci grip with blue detailing, and I can get me a sweet bracelet with a rainbow on
it. Maybe.
That's cool.
Anyway,
I really like that. So you can buy all the Gucci watches and jewelry we've been chatting about at Gucci.com. They've got secure checkout and speedy shipping. Of course, you can also head to your closest Gucci boutique or authorized dealer. And naturally, this being OT the podcast, we'll link everything up in the show notes so you can check out what we selected.
All right, Merry Christmas, guys. Now let's get back to the show.
But let's not dilly-dally, Andy Green. Let's get Tim Mosso on the line.
Let's do it.
Andy, we've got a very special guest today, and I've got to say it's a fan favourite guest. We have the man, the myth, the glasses, Tim Mosso from Watchbox Studios, Watchbox, everywhere, the internet, YouTube. He's a resident...
The king of YouTube.
Yeah, the king of YouTube. He's a guy who, if you've ever wanted to know about a watch, headed to YouTube, you've heard his words and you've, listened to his reviews. He's He's a GOAT. Tim Mosso, welcome to OT the podcast. How are you?
I am doing great, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah,
No, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure, Tim. And I think Felix, you missed from the intro, but we had Miles Fisher on who referred to, I think, Tim Mosso as the performance athlete of watch reviews.
yeah, that's kind of true. Tim, what do you think? How do you think of if you compared yourself to an Olympic sport of watch reviewing, where would that be? Are you a sprinter? Are you a marathon? Are you?
I would say more than anything else. Well, I'm a cyclist, so that's where my
Okay.
passion is. But I would say more than anything, I feel like a sailor because when you're sailing, you're at the mercy of the wind, and when your entire career is tied up in reviewing and explaining watches, you're kind of at the mercy of the product and what you can do. I think with your enthusiasm and knowledge to make a light wind productive is kind of like what you do with your enthusiasm and your knowledge to make a middling watch exciting. You got to find a way to get yourself revved up and work with what you've got.
I can relate to that, and that's a very good analogy. I was just going for like the simple, track and field sort of stuff, but you took it to the next level and made something meaningful out of it. I'm very impressed. Typical Tim. At the end of this interview, we're going to have to get you to review the interview as well and
Oh,
see how
sure.
it goes. I want to start with a very sort of deceptively simple question. And this is basically the whole reason we asked you to get on the podcast is how do you review a watch on video?
So basically, how I review a watch and commit it to video?
I'm more interested, yeah, but I sort of want to know about how you approach it and
Oh, okay. I see.
what you think of the sort of the key things that people should know.
It's always important to just talk about the fit right out of the gate. It's hard to tell how a watch fits on the internet. You get a measurement that may have no bearing on the actual size of the watch, the shape of the watch, and then you've got the shape of your wrist. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is ergonomics. A watch is very sensual. It's immediate. It's something that has to work aesthetically, but also it has to be comfortable. It can't be comically oversized or undersized. It has to fit on your wrist. If it's a weirdly shaped watch, that could be a deal killer. So I start by introducing the watch, giving its full name and make and model, then putting it on my wrist. And I say, here's the size of my wrist, here's the shape. I'm going to show you a cuff shot from the side, an
Mm.
over the top shot, and then what I like to say is this is my new thing, the down the barrel shot, where you're looking straight down my arm. And
Mhm.
if
Oh,
it's got
interesting.
like a gangly lug overhang, if the thing's broader than my wrist, you're going to see that right away. So if it's like an IWC Big Pilot, 46 millimeters I mean, you look at the HYT H0, it's 48 millimeters. It must be huge. No, it's
Mm.
small because it has no lugs. But an IWC Big Pilot at 46, it's about 57 millimeters across the wrist. And I feel like I need to wear it on my bicep. So I start with fit, I start with feel, I start with ergonomics.
Yep.
From there, I talk about things like peripherals and I work my way from the outside in. So I'll start with the buckle, I'll talk about the strap. If there's something unusual about either one, it's really stiff. It won't pull straight down from the lug. If the buckle is a deployant, I'm going to mention that. If it's a
Mm.
twin trigger deployant, I'm going to mention that because that's higher quality than, say, friction fit, and that matters on something like a sports watch. If it's got a clever feature like pull tab spring bars on a Journe or a Patek so I can remove the strap without a tool, I'll mention that. And then I'll mention how it joins with the lugs. Usually it's just spring bars, but if
Mm.
it's something like Panerai with screws and bars or it's a quick release lug system, then I talk about that. I start with the case. I'm now talking about the watch itself. If there's anything notable, how it's finished, particular design cues, tricks that the designers use to make a big watch look less bulky, things like stepping the bezel back from the case, things like a concave bezel, or in the case of something like a Patek Philippe 5905, hollowing out the lugs. I like to showcase that because most of the photos you see of watches online are just soldier shots. It's like a mug shot. It's the dial and you're looking at it dead on. If it has some lovely contouring on the side, that gets lost. So I want to focus on that. And then I work my way into the dial. I typically talk about the dial features, and there are various different qualities of a dial that might be interesting. Then I turn it over and I talk about the movement. And typically, where I end the video is with a loom shot if the watch is loomed. And so that's from start to finish, ergonomics, and then I end with a loom shot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great approach and almost a recipe or a formula, I guess. And after reviewing, thousands of watches in that way, I guess you would get to it. And so that's your approach. What I'm curious to know is for, say, a consumer who goes to a resource like YouTube to get information out of a watch review, what do you think the most important thing is for sort of that consumer to bear in mind when they're watching, say, one of your watch reviews? What's the most important thing that you think they need to take away? Is it, a watch you can't wear a watch on the internet, you need to try it on? Is it, these three things matter or these don't? Do you have a kind of any ideas there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to take two things to heart. One is going to be that fit and the sizing, and that's so elemental that I don't think you can get past it, which is why I open with it. But then
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is you need to understand where the watch stacks up. Like there are some brands that will talk about their watches being exquisite works of art, artisanal craft, from the loving hand of a master to your wrist. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, look, this is a luxury product, no doubt. It's worth thousands of dollars, but almost all of this is machine executed, and I'm going to be honest about that. So I'm going to evaluate the watch as it really is and try to bypass all of the marketing pablum because there's a lot of that. And so if a watch is well engineered but not artisanally finished, I want you to understand you're looking at something that is mostly an industrial product and buy accordingly. On the other hand, if I'm encountering something that's a rare work of art, but no one's talking about it, say something like, Laurent Ferrier watches, they've kind of come on some hard times. They were hot about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. They're still among the best finished watches in the business, and everyone's talking about FP Journe, which is mostly mechanical finish. So when I look at something like Laurent Ferrier, rather than trying to set straight the record of a watch that's been overmarketed, I want to set straight the record of a watch that's been undersold. So I want people to walk away with a real impression of the watch as it is and where it stands in the broader context of competing products.
That's a really good way of looking at that sort of balance. Something that you mentioned in the lead up was where you talked about approaching a watch that you had a middling interest in and sort of coming across with the same level of enthusiasm or standards. It's a bit of a double question. How do you talk about a watch that you aren't personally into and try and maintain some sort of objectivity or information? And related to that, what do you think makes a bad watch?
Okay, well, let me talk about how I advocate for a watch that's not interesting to me. I have
Mm-hmm.
reviewed, by my estimation, somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 watches when you count Instagram, YouTube, and trade shows. So I have handled more watches personally than some people who will sell watches for a living for their entire life, which is to say, most of the watches that I've handled are not the kind of watches I would collect.
Sure.
I'm not into them. So how do I be fair? Well, I just take I take the attorney's approach, which is where I might not like my client, I might not think he's got a strong case, but I'm going to be the best possible advocate for the things that are good about him, what he's done right, and how objectively I can be a fan of the type, so to speak, because I'm not into an Hublot King Power. That's not a style or a model of watch I would buy. But I understand that the fan of that watch wants to know, is it big? Is it cool? Is it a Harley Davidson for my wrist? Does it look neat? Is it going to be rugged enough to wear in a pool? Can I shower with it? These are the concerns that a person buying a Patek Philippe Calatrava doesn't have. But an Hublot customer absolutely wants to know that. So I'm going to speak to that and be an advocate for the type, do my best case to make a case for the watch as its designers intended it and its fans would expect to see it. So I'm not going to say, this is too big and I don't like big watches and just take my ball and go home. Because that's not relevant to the person who's interested in this watch. He wants to know all of those things I described: style, size, durability, versatility. And sure enough, the King Power is very water resistant. You could wear it in the shower. Is it big? Is it bold? Is it too loud? Is it so loud that it's going to drown out a room visually speaking? Yes, it is. And for the guy who's buying that watch, who's riding the Harley Davidson with the big V, the guy who's all about being seen and being heard, he's going to see that video and he's going to be in love. Even though I'm not in love with the watch, I have managed to be a great advocate for it and to speak his language.
I love that. I love the lawyer review.
That is a very good way of answering that question.
Yeah, I love that. All right, on the flip side, Tim, having reviewed and handled upwards of 6,000-7,000 timepieces, what in your opinion makes a great watch?
I think a great watch is a class-leading product. And, there are different types of classes of watch. If you want to know how the Piaget Altiplano Ultimate Concept stacks up as a dress watch, it's one of the most innovative, distinctive, remarkable, and original that you're going to find at any price. If you want to know how it stacks up against a Submariner for diving, terribly. So I would say you have to look at a watch and compare it to its class and ask, is it well made? How much energy goes into making it? A Rolex is well made, but it's not artisanally finished. If you've got something like a Blancpain 50 Fathoms, which is as tough as a Rolex, but it's also beautifully finished under its case back, then you've got something that's impressive in its class as a diver. But, I'm not going to compare a thin watch to a dive watch. I'm going to compare dive watches to dive watches, thin watches to thin watches, dress watches to the like, and specialized complications. I'm going to say, this is a good artisanal effort. It's beautifully made, but it's not a great minute repeater. So instead of buying, an IWC Portuguese minute repeater, which has a weak and dated minute repeater module in it, I would say, you've really got to consider something like, this is an area where FP Journe is great because he uses steel for his minute repeaters, things loud as all hell, or a Jaeger-LeCoultre with their trebuchet hammers. So I'm going to compare a watch to others in its class, and it's going to win points based on, if it's got the best value pricing compared to its competitors, the most features, the best ergonomics. If I'm judging it against a kind of watch that's expected to be beautifully finished, say high horology dress watches, then I'm going to give extra points to that Laurent Ferrier Gallet micro rotor for having, the best finish this side of Grubel Forsey, and so on and so forth. So I think a good watch is a watch that's better than its peers, and I think a great watch is a watch that's transcendent to the point where you might say, I wasn't in the market for a steel sports watch, but then I saw the Audemars Piguet 15202 platinum and titanium, and I was smitten. So a good watch is class competitive. A great watch rises above class to a sort of objective love factor. It's something that's so great it transcends time and genre and price point. And I think there are only a handful of watches that are really that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It's interesting, sort of when you're talking about class-leading products, you mentioned the Altiplano Ultimate. I don't think I've tried the production version of it on, but I certainly tried the concept watch on a few years ago. And it's just to sort of call this out as an explicit example. I think I would almost not call that a watch, because for me, it's not something that I think is practical to wear. And maybe that's a quirk of sort of ultra thin watches where they, the very purpose of their being is to be as slender and minimal as possible. But I don't think I could wear that Piaget on a daily or, even outside of a boutique showroom sort of situation. Whereas other ultra thin watches from JLC and Bulgari and other Piagets, I find much more functional and practical. So is there a balance in terms of being the best at doing something that it does, say like a 10,000 meter dive watch, or something ridiculous like that, like the King Power? On that metric, it's really, really good. But as a whole package, there's something about it that just doesn't translate.
Well, I think it's always important to recognize a watch that is highly focused and optimized for one job. It's true that, first of all, the Cobalt case does a pretty good job of preventing weird crap like displaced staffs or popped crystals, so I'm not worried about that. But you're going to wear that watch with a suit. You're going to wear that watch to an elegant event. It's going to be a fashion accessory to a full formal ensemble. And on that basis, it's like a race car. A race car is designed to do one thing really, really well. On the track at Spa-Francorchamps, a Lamborghini Huracan GTR is going to be fantastic. The second you drive it beyond the paddock, it's an absolute disaster. It won't even make it to the road. So the Piaget is an example of something that has been hugely optimized to do one thing really well. Whereas I think there are watches that are a lot more general, where it's, something like an Omega Diver 300 meter it's certainly a dive watch, but you could wear it as your dress watch. You could wear it as a casual watch. I wore that watch through college. I wore it in the military. I wore it to formal events. I wore it to my, U.S. Navy second class swim qualification. Some watches have a bigger range than others, but when you're looking at things that represent kind of the apex of a genre, it's very rare to find a movement with 1,000 pieces that's also durable enough to wash the dog. So there are limits in the handling. I'm just saying.
That's an answer for you. Oh, I love that. Wow. So, Tim, you mentioned a couple of moments ago that in your opinion, there are a few watches that you would consider great and, elevate beyond their category. What watches were you kind of talking about specifically, or what do you think the greatest watches, in the world are?
I think the truly great watches are going to be ones that have stood the test of time, that are as
Mm-hmm.
relevant today as they were when they were new, or more relevant. Let's not forget that prior to the arrival of the Jubilee, Portuguese 5441 in 1993, prior to that point, a little more than 600 Portuguesers had been made from 1939 to about 1989. So we're talking a watch that was hardly ever made. But here we are, and most of a
Yeah.
century later, that watch has never been more relevant than it is now. So a great watch is going to stand the test of time. It's going to weather the years more or less intact,
Uh-huh.
and it's going to be just as relevant and appealing over the long haul as it was in the beginning. Like, there are a lot of watches that were absolute sensations in the short term. Franck Muller and the tonneau cases in the 90s. Oh my God, everyone had to have it.
Yeah.
The Cartier Pasha by Gerald Genta in 1985. Have you seen the Cartier Pasha? You must have it. There are
Mm-hmm.
watches that are very popular in the short term. There was a time during the 2000s when bigger was better and biggest was best, and that's when the King Power happened back in 2008. And all of a sudden, we had a 48 millimeter watch that people were getting on wait lists to own. And now Hublot doesn't even make that watch anymore. It's focusing on the classic fusion, smaller cases, thinner cases, more discretion. So you can pretty much weed out the watches that don't go the distance over 10 years or 15 years. It's when you start looking at watches like the Rolex Oyster Perpetual or the Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, the Nautilus, the Royal Oak. When you start looking at watches like the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch, I hate to say it, but there's a reason these watches dominate search trends on the internet. It's because they're really sharp, appropriate, versatile, and enduring. And they don't need a lot of hype to sustain consumer interest because they were pretty much made right out of the gate. It's like Ozzy Osbourne. He was doing the same thing in 1969 he's doing now. He got it right out of the gate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that analogy again makes sense. So I agree with you, by the way, about the Pasha and the King Power and Frank Mueller. It's when I was starting to get interested in watches, Frank Mueller was everything. I've got some auction catalogs here where they were achieving much greater results than Daytonas, which is crazy. What is the Pasha or the King Power of 2020?
Well, at the moment, it's hard to say because this is the kind of thing that's easier to discern from a distance. It's like standing right up next to a mountain. You can't really tell how tall it is. But I would say right now, some watches that are hot are going to be things like Hublot's Classic Fusion. That's at this point, I think something like 50% of their sales. That's a watch that's got a lot of traction. And if you look at the Hublot anniversary piece, the 40th anniversary piece that just came out, it's amazing how close the original Hublot is to what we today call the Classic Fusion.
Yeah,
And
it's
they're trying to
amazing.
revive interest in that.
Yeah.
There's also the Bulgari Octo Finissimo, which is red hot at the moment. And I don't want to write it off because that shape has been around for 20 years. I mean, Bulgari bought that shape when it bought Gerald Genta. I can't say for sure it's a Genta design, but it was a Genta, the company, design.
Uh-huh.
So it's remarkably successful at the moment. I think since 2014 and the beginning of the Octo Finissimos, the thin ones, it's taken off. And I think they've got to be real careful with that, because as successful as it's been, once you start looking online at how many variations exist, you start to feel that there's that potential for iterative exhaustion, which we eventually reached with the Franck Muller, the Cartier Pasha, a lot of watches like the Raymond Weil Parsifal of the 1990s, where people just
Yeah.
like scratch their head and they're like, what? Uh, and I would also say maybe something like the Chanel J12, which has had a great run for 2 decades. But I'm not sure. I mean, that was how Chanel first got the attention of guys. So that was kind of a big deal. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure I see that having the same traction 20 years from now. But these are watches that have been very successful in the short term.
That's really interesting, the Octo Finissimo in particular, because you're right. It's sort of on many accounts a fantastic watch and still quite early in the, I guess, iterations as we know it. You know, Felix and I often say that we love it, but it's a little bit too big for us to sort of personally own, and that's sort of one of the hesitations that we have with, buying one. And I find it interesting, your point around, you hop online and see the variations, and they've done, the uh, limited editions for,
Dubai, for
the Middle
Harrods.
East, and
Yep.
for Harrods. They've done, they released, I think, 5 different dials this year in different cases, and they have gone quite hard on the variety, which is potentially a shame, because it is. I think it's a great watch. And do you think that? I guess my question is: do you think that the Octo Finissimo is a really good watch, and potentially Bulgari are going too hard too early, or too hard too soon, before they really let it kind of grow and get more refined as a kind of newer watch?
Yeah, I think it's a great example of a class-leading product, especially in the 100-meter version
Uh
that
huh.
came out this year. It's
Mm.
barely thinner, but now you can swim with it, and it's in steel, which is what people wanted from the beginning. That's a fantastic product. I think Bulgari should step back and just remember, one of the reasons it's been successful is because it's distinct from all the other LVMH watch brands, and it's been able to develop its brand and its model lines with an eye to quality, unique features, value, and rarity. And if you look at Bulgari's brand as a whole, it has the clout to stay separate from Hublot and Zenith
Yeah.
and Tag Heuer, and that's all to its advantage. So it needs to look at some of the things that the watch group at LVMH hasn't done terribly well, and I think production and exclusivity have always been challenges for them. I think Bulgari has to, just ask, how are we going to keep the Octo Finissimo relatively rare, so we get good sale prices, people don't expect discounts, and
Mm.
it wouldn't be the worst thing if we had wait lists each year for the new models. I think that's what they need to do to protect their brands. I think they're run by good people, they have great products. So I think just they need to maybe sit back and ask, we've got somewhere between 30 and 40 variations on this watch, have we maybe come out of the gate too fast? Another brand and another model, if I might just add,
Yeah.
will we look back and compare those Hublot King Powers of the 2000s and Franck Mullers of the 90s to the Tudor Black Bay, which is a watch that,
Mm.
um, I mean, if we want to talk about iterations, all of a sudden this makes Bulgari, I mean, it's a completely different class of iteration, where Tudor has essentially become the Black Bay company. Who wants, people aren't talking about the date eights, the 1926s, the fast riders. People are like, well, what's the new Black Bay, and when are we getting a Tudor Submariner re-edition? And it's very difficult
Mm.
to bask in reflected glory. There are a lot of brands over the last 20 years that have decided that vintage reeditions and vintage plays are where the safe money is. And while this is true,
100%.
it's difficult to coin tomorrow's classics by reanimating yesterday's. And this is the idea of reflected glory. If I'm only buying a car because I'm nostalgic for the thing that it references, is there really any intrinsic long-term value to that car or that watch? Because I mean, this isn't something you guys encountered in Australia, but in the United States, we had this car called the PT Cruiser that looked like,
Yeah.
a 1930s delivery van, and everyone loved it with its separate fenders and its tall roof.
Yep. We had them, Tim. We had them.
I'm sorry to hear that, but now that's a car you buy for like $2,000 on a buy here, pay here used car lot, and it was because ultimately people weren't that interested in the PT Cruiser. They might have rather just had like a cool vintage car. And the vintage auto trend, it came and it went, and a lot of the cars that are really retro are the ones that caused people to lose interest the fastest, and they're the ones you can buy cheapest today. So the retro play is an easy one, and it's a bit of a cloying effect that eventually runs thin.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, and that's something that I think is one of the, aside from overproduction, like you said, and over iteration, and that focused on novelty as a driving force in especially sort of listed companies. Um, I think that death of sort of innovative watch design is one of the biggest risks. Like uh, I struggle to think of a genuinely classic watch design that came after Omega's SMP case, that 1993 case. I don't think there's anything after that point that I could look at and go, this will be an icon in 30 or 40 years time. Is there anything that you think would?
93 was an interesting year because in 93, if you think about it, we got the first production version of the Royal Oak Offshore, the first civilian market Panerai,
Mm.
and we got the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter, and all three of those designs are still going strong today.
And
So if you want to look,
IWC's pilots as well, I think. Was that the
well,
one?
we did get a couple of interesting IWC products that year. Yeah, the Pilot's chronograph. We got ceramic and split-second
Yeah,
chronographs from them, which were remarkable, and the revival of the Portugueser.
yeah.
The 5441 was the resumption of, that was the 125th anniversary for IWC back then. That was the resumption of regular production of the Portugueser, and that watch today is a certifiable collectible in all
Mm,
of its forms. So 93 was really an interesting year across the board because of all the stuff that was coming out that's still around.
mm,
It's difficult to look to the 90s, the late 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and say, here's a surefire bet to still be available in 80 years or some ridiculous thing like that. Whereas we're closing in 11 years, we're going to be at the centennial of the Reverso. And
mm,
we've already roared past 100 years of the Cartier tank. So
mm.
adding to that canon of classic watches is really, really tough.
Yeah,
I
true.
don't think the Patek Aquanaut is solid enough to become a classic like the Nautilus. I think it was always a budget option. I think it was the idea back in the 90s that a rubber strap would dress down the Patek image. They needed something younger. But I don't think ultimately it's beautiful or unique enough. One is clearly derivative of the other.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps the Vacheron Overseas, which is probably stronger right now than it's ever been, that came out in 1996. And while it's never been exactly the same design, it was drawn heavily from Jörg Heisig's 1977 Model 222.
Yeah.
And to this day, if you look at the 222, the 96 watch, the 2004 redesign, and the 2016 redesign, you can say, okay, this is recognizably the same shape, the same product, most of the same details. So, just on the basis of longevity and collector interest in those models right now, I would say that has some potential to be a long-term hit and maybe
Interesting.
part of the canon. We might talk about the Nautilus and the Royal Oak and the Overseas rather than talking about the Overseas as kind of the arriviste of the group.
Mm, interesting. This is a sort of a related point. We just launched an episode today with Neil Ferrier from Discommon, and something he sort of said in that interview. If you're not familiar with him, he's a industrial design company and a mechanical engineer. We talked about watches, and he said that his biggest sort of problem with the watch industry is that cases in particular are not often thought about and not often done well. He sort of compared, he was talking about the case of the Lang Zeitwerk, for example, as being pretty simple and basic in comparison to the rest of the watch. And he said that the watch industry can really use some people that understand, good lines and good curvature, which I think found a very interesting argument. What do you think is the most neglected part of watch design?
So the most neglected part of watch design is going to be lugs. And I
Mm.
think cases are relatively easy to do because you draw them out, they're long, they're thin, there's a lot of area over which to distribute the lines. But then with the lugs, you've got two jobs. One is ergonomics, and then the other is aesthetics. And it's like an author writing a book or a director making a movie, and he's got this story and narrative that he loves so much, he's unwilling or unable to end it well. And I see a lot of watches fall apart at the lugs. And if you look at the criticism of the Zeitwerk case, um, what's really being criticized is the generic lug profile, which you'll find on literally every Longa watch. The case is fine, but if the lugs were fluid and integrated like a Portugueser, you would instantly have a different look. If they had a corne de vache cow horn profile like Vacheron, immediately that changes the character of the watch. So the round case of the Longa isn't the problem. Though granted, they do over-iterate that shape, it's the way the lugs end, and every single time, regardless of size or model or price, you're going to get the exact same lug shape. Even Rolex, with its Oyster case, doesn't quite do that. The Datejust is not the Submariner. The Submariner is not the Deep Sea. The Deep Sea is not the Explorer 2, and the Explorer 2 is not the Daytona. So if you look at Rolex, which above all else is mass production, consistency, and iteration, even they feature like rainforest level diversity of case design compared to Longa. And that's the problem, because the romance of the watch is in the lugs, and bad lug design can destroy a watch. Look at watches like the Nautilus and the Royal Oak and the million different copies of them today. Where does the Longa Odysseus fall apart? Not the case and not the bracelet, but the junction between the case and the bracelet. The love of these integrated bracelet watches is really the love of the junction between the case and the bracelet, the man-machine interface. And that's where the iteration is taking place. Everyone is copying the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. For the most part, they're not copying the bezel and they're not copying the case sculpting. They're copying the lug junction, which is a very distinctive angular and integrated 70s look. And I think that's where good design lives and dies. And I think really, if you had to pare down what most brands do badly, it's lug design.
I'd agree with that.
Andy, could we just take a break? I need a refill.
What are you drinking, Felix?
It's your classic filter roast from our new coffee sponsor, Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
Beverage sponsor, Felix, we have made it.
Yeah, I've got a cheeky Yirgacheffe filter on the go at the moment. Ethiopian bean with some light floral notes. It's my daily, and I can't get enough.
Well, Felix, I'm actually punching out another double espresso using their Colombian Spirit of Peace espresso roast blend. It's sweet and biscuity.
So here's the deal. Use OT30, that's OT30, for 30% off your order at checkout. On top of that, Inglewood Coffee Roasters offer free shipping on all Victorian orders and Australia-wide when you spend more than $50.
Head to inglewoodcoffeeroasters.com.au to place an order today. We'll link that up. OT the podcast, fueled by Inglewood Coffee Roasters. We're talking about design still, and the need for new design and not hanging on to the past and just doing those vintage reissues like we've talked about. What I'm curious to get your take and your thoughts on, and I'm sure you've shared them a lot in the past, but a brand like AP doing the code 1159, I'd say that is sort of pushing into the future as opposed to looking at the past. They've obviously done some more interesting pieces very recently with the Grand Sonnery, I think the Super Sonnery, with that kind of crazy blue dial. Where do you stand on that as a model? I know it was very controversial when it was released and maybe a little misunderstood. Do you think that maybe it was misunderstood because it is a sort of more innovative design with the future in mind?
I think there were two problems it had. First, let me say, although I've slated the code 1159 for its weaknesses, which were well known at the point of launch, they were really two things. One, it doesn't photograph well, and two, the dials on the mainstream model, the chronograph and the automatic, were insipid. They were expensive, make no mistake, but they looked flat, colorless, and cheap. And the problem there was that if they had just borrowed the gradient dials from the tourbillon and the minute repeater in the first year, they would have had a hit on their hands. Because if you looked at 2019's Bolshoi Theater 99-piece white gold limited edition, it was a Russian market special edition with a gradient enamel dial just like the minute repeater and the tourbillon, and it was stunning. It showed what the watch could have been. And I remember I spoke to a person from Audemars Piguet who had direct input on this, and I said, you guys got 90% of the way there, and then you gave it a boring face. Not a cheap face, but one that looked cheaper than it was. You need a gradient. Even if you do it in lacquer, get the gradient fade from the complications, put it on the automatic and the chronograph, and you will have fixed the problem. Because when you look at that watch in person, it's three-dimensional, sculptural. It has recesses and crevices. It has curves. It has angles. It has loving and frankly non-cliched references to the royal oak that are nod and wink level acknowledgments of AP's heritage without iterating the royal oak. And it's not thick either. You think it's thick when you see it in photographs, but then you hold it in the hand, you realize it's no thicker than a Rolex Daytona, which is not thick at all. So the problem they had was they created a watch that was almost prismatic in its effect. It has three dimensions and it needs to be experienced that way. And then second, they stopped short of a color gradient to add a little bit more differentiation to the dials. And once they did that this year, as far as I'm concerned, they fixed the problem. So as slated as those watches were, it's because AP got so close to an excellent product and then stopped short. I feel like the dials on the chronograph and the automatic, which were lacquer and monotone, must have been the last thing they designed when time and budget were wearing thin, and they had to launch the watch. So with this year's lesson learned from the complications in the Bolshoi theater model, I think they finally have a watch that looks good enough online that people will give it a chance in person, and that's when I think they'll be convinced.
Amazing, and yeah, it certainly was a polarizing release. And forgive me here, but this is as good a segue as I'm going to get to ask the question. Speaking of polarized, was the first time that you left the sunglasses on your head an accident, or has it always been a part of the Tim Mosso plan and brand?
I have no brand, and nothing I do is contrived. For the most part, when I was at Watch You Want, I was down in Florida where it's always sunny, and I'd wear sunglasses to the office, and then I always had a hat on when I was in the company. So I'd put the glasses on top of my hat, and I'd record for a couple of hours. You got to remember, for the first couple of years I did this, I wasn't on camera. I didn't even announce my last name. I was always, "Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want." Because I wanted, Watch You Want to have the flexibility to use those videos if, I wasn't around in the future, and not cultivate like a cult of personality or, sort of a personal brand. So I was always just Tim and I was Hands. And then about 3 years into that gig, Danny Govberg bought the company and he wanted to get into pre-owned, and he started saying, "I want to see you on camera." And so this was entirely new. And around about 2016, toward the end of the year, I built a rig out of used equipment, and I built a set out of my Baselworld and SIHH keepsakes. And all of a sudden, I was on TV, and I just appeared wearing my work clothes, which was generally the Watch You Want shirt, the hat, and the glasses. So no, none of it was planned. And there are days when I forget to wear the glasses onto the set, because these days I have my own office. I'm not constantly being moved around a sales floor to different desks. And if I put my glasses down, I know they're going to stay there. So none of that was ever intentional. And I've always liked to say the watches are the stars, and I try to keep it that way. When the glasses started becoming a distraction, I started thinking about leaving them aside too. Because again, I'm not a me guy, and I don't want to have I don't want to get hung up on style. If people don't like the glasses, I won't wear them. It's that simple.
No, I reckon stick with. I reckon it's
I
good.
like it.
I think it's
I like it.
it's a yeah. I just think it's nice. I don't think personal brand is always a bad thing, and I think the two can go. You can still hero the watches and be authentic to yourself at the same time. So
Yeah, it's very like wholesome and authentic. That's
yeah.
exactly what I was thinking, Felix.
But I want to talk about something else. So you've reviewed thousands and thousands of watches. Many of them are probably quite forgettable. Many of them are, slight versions of the same thing. Are there any that stick with you?
Oh, there are quite a few that stick with me. There have been
Top
some
three.
incredible watches. I would say the top three of all the watches I've ever reviewed. One was the Piaget Altiplano Ultimate Concept,
Nice.
and it was quite literally the concept. This was the prototype at Watches and Wonders Miami back in 2019, and it was breathtaking. I'd seen it at SIHH, but I didn't have a chance to handle it, much less review it. And on the basis of having, I guess, spoken to their tech guy who was there flying the flag and earned enough trust, I was able to actually wear it, operate it, and explain it. So that's easily one of the top three that I've encountered. I would also say that of the watches I've encountered and remembered, a lot of them were at trade shows. So it's a little bit tough to separate the stuff I saw that was e- extravagant and deliberately so at a trade show to the stuff that I just happened to encounter here. So of the watches I encountered here, I would have to say another watch that really stayed with me was the de Bethune DB28 Digital, a timepiece that caught my eye on the internet when it came out in 2014, and it was always sort of a grail watch, a personal grail in my mind that I wanted to at least see firsthand. And when I
Mm.
first saw it, they say don't meet your heroes. They're never as tall or as handsome or as debonair and charming. But this, it was taller, more charismatic, stronger, and more beautiful than I'd ever imagined. It was like meeting your hero and finding out you actually underestimated him. This watch is gorgeous, and it wasn't just the one watch and the dream realized, but it awakened a passion for the de Bethune brand that I didn't previously have, and it encouraged me to dig deeper. And what started out as, I think, a sense of, a real thrill with a single watch became a passion for an entire brand and a project that continues to this day to try to promote that brand because I think that is deserved notoriety, and that's quality that needs to be shouted out from the hilltops. And then third was a watch called the MIH watch. It was actually
Yeah.
designed by a man named Christian Gaffner. It was built by Paul Gerber in his Zurich workshops. And the actual annual calendar system was designed by Ludwig Oxlin. And the idea initially was that this was going to be a benefit product for a museum gift shop, and a portion of the proceeds would go to I believe it was the Loc Museum of Horology. And so the watch was beautiful because it was minimalist. It was truly Bauhaus. Like you hear that word overused. Everything is Bauhaus. But
Mm.
realistically, if you look at Walter Gropius and the original Bauhaus aesthetic, it wasn't so much stylized and frivolous, design for its own sake. It wasn't designed to be eye-catching and um, brash and I mean, you see that Audi TT, it's often described as Bauhaus. That's
Mm.
style for style's sake.
Mm.
And Bauhaus was not that. Bauhaus was, to borrow a term from elsewhere in modernist architecture, a machine in which to live.
Mm.
And the MIH watch was a chronograph, an annual calendar, and a design statement pared down to the minimum of lines, the minimum of mass, the minimum of color, and yet it explodes off the wrist with personality. That's real Bauhaus. So to me, it was those three.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great answer.
It's a great watch.
Yeah, jeez. So Tim, having so much experience in the watch industry, having seen so many different watches, the connection with Watchbox and just the overall volume that you have, I'm curious to know what a guy like you has in his own watch collection and how you actually even shop for yourself. Because when I think about, you see new watches every week and you look at it and oh, gee, I'd love to own this, I'd love to own that. And it gets a little bit overwhelming. And I can only imagine how hard it must be for you to kind of personally shop.
Yeah, it's a good question because for the last couple of years, I've been wearing this one Zinn watch, and people have been asking me if I'm still a collector, even. And I am a collector. I have a lot of watches that mean a lot to me, but they're watches that mostly represent my past and distant
Uh-huh.
past. I've got my grandfather's Omega. It's a Seamaster DeVille from 1973. 25 years with Remington electric shaver. He fixed shavers for a living back when they would fix your electric shaver rather than throw
Very
it out and
cool.
give you a new one. So I also have a Zodiac Seawolf, an old one that he left me, and that was a non-runner when I got it, and I'm still slowly restoring it.
Mm.
I've got two Swatch watches, a Blue Rebel, which is blue with green date date discs, and my mom gave me that for Christmas 2013. I have a Swatch System 51, the System Frog, that my mom bought me for my 33rd birthday. I have a Bulova Accutron Space View from 1974 that I bought to celebrate my first job out of college, and that was my first year on the job. I bought it in 2007 after 1 year. I also have my graduation Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter that I mentioned earlier in the show, and that's been with me since 2002, and it is the original printed dial version.
Yeah, nice.
I also have a 1974 Jaeger LeCoultre E877 Snowdrop Memovox. It is very 70s. It is a lugless watch. It is a perfect circle. Its dial was the basis for the 2016 Memovox boutique exclusive with the blue dial.
Yeah.
That's where the dial came from. I own that watch, and I like it because it's the year Blue Oyster Cult's Secret Treaties came out, probably their masterpiece album, and then I wore it to a Blue Oyster Cult concert. So it's got a lot of important associations for me personally, because I started practicing guitar. I'm not good, but I started because of my admiration for the Blue Oyster Cult. And then finally, I've got my Zinn, my EZM 1.1. And back in 2018, I sold all my watches because I figured it was time to reboot. And, I didn't know if I was going to be staying with Watchbox at that point. So I thought, you know what, let me just get one watch to cap my time here, to distill everything I've done into one keepsake. And that's what the Zinn was. I've spent the last 3 years being convinced to stay on year by year with Watchbox. So obviously the adventure continues. And, I'm at the point where I'm thinking about the future, but I'm also sort of thinking like, well, what if I were to resume collecting? What would the contours of that collection look like? I used to limit myself to one brand, and that was how I avoided buying everything that I loved every day because I see tons of it. So with a theme, I was able to hold back. But now I'm thinking, well, what do I like and what would I like to add? It's been 3 years. I've earned a watch or two. And what do I value most in a model? What do I value most in a watch? And I can really start thinking about that process again. And that's sort of where I am now.
Are you sort of in the middle of that, or can you say what you do value in a watch, or are you
Oh,
still
yeah.
working that out?
I want a watch that I'm going to wear above all. I had a lot
Yeah.
of dress watches in the past that were delicate, and whether it was because it was gold or it was platinum that scratches too easily, or because they had winding systems that were really inefficient and they were stopping all the time, or because the timepiece itself is insufficiently resilient to deal with the slings and arrows of life on my wrist. There were watches that I was not wearing. So it's got to be something like with the DB28 Digital from De Bethune, it is light. It is grade 5 titanium. It has a robust shock protection system. It's a kind of watch that I love to wear. It doesn't have to be worn with a suit or formal attire. It checks all the boxes there. I also love watches like, for example, the MIH watch, because on top of everything else we discussed, it's 100 meters water resistant and it's titanium. So that's a wear it all the time watch.
Yeah.
The Ball Engineer 2 Magneto S, which is probably the most fascinating sub $4,000 watch I've ever encountered. If you watch my video of that watch, you could see just how many refinements it has and how many ways it was made different and clever and appealing. And it just consolidates a ton of value into a very affordable, compact, and wearable package. And, of course, there are a lot of brands that interest me, like Blancpain with the 50 Fathoms. I've always said the 5015 is the Cadillac of divers, and I always said if I was going to buy a dive watch, that would be the first one on my list. So there's a lot of stuff that I love, and for the most part, I have to love the history and the design and the engineering, but I also have to be really sure that it fits the style of how I wear my watches, and it's going to get wrist time. So I'm
That's
moving toward durability.
That's a good, and I think that's a really interesting sort of, you just like everyone else is sort of maturing as a watch wearer and collector, and it's fascinating to sort of be able to sort of get a bit of a glimpse into that. We've sort of talked a little bit about your sort of your professional past, about Govberg and what you seek and not what you seek, what you want, and Watchbox. And Watchbox is where you're at now. So can you tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and what you do there?
Yeah, there have been a lot of pre-owned vendors over the years. I think pre-owned watches have always been a thing, but there were always onesies and twosies sold out of local jewelers where the jeweler would take a brand that they don't distribute and they take it in as a trade on a new watch. And so that was pretty much the level of pre-owned watches during the 90s, whatever you found in the jeweler's case. Then in the early 2000s, we started to see the advent of online auctions, and all of a sudden, the more adventurous collectors would start buying used watches on eBay. And this was particularly important in building up certain brands like Panerai and Zenith, for example, that didn't really have well fleshed out international marketing and distribution plans. So it wasn't just that pre-owned became a thing online, which is really what eBay started. That was their great innovation, but also that pre-owned online began to plant the seeds of a global watch community where guys in Italy would trade Panerai watches to dudes in Canada and the United States and Australia. So with the arrival of the internet came widespread selling of used watches, but also the online watch community that generated interest in buying them. And then from eBay, we started to see specialists in the 2000s, in the late 2000s, that would just sell used watches. But again, we're talking relatively small operations, and Watch You Want started as an eBay account. It became a safe in O.J. Watley's house. O.J. Watley was the founder of Watch You Want. And eventually, he realized he was over-dependent on eBay as a platform, and there were, seller fees there that he didn't necessarily want to deal with, and, right of return rules that weren't always, fair to sellers. So he said, I'm going to have my own website, and I'm going to sell off the website. And that brings you to where we were in the early 2010s with pre-owned sellers that had eBay accounts, yes, but they also had their own websites, and you could buy directly from them through that platform. What Watchbox brought about in 2017 was something that is as close to certified pre-owned as you can get, where you take all of the disciplines involved in the sale of watches and the service of watches, from counterfeit busting to watchmaking to refinishing to sales, after-sales service, logistics people, shipping, inventory, marketing, and it brought all of that under one roof. And you mentioned you saw the old Govberg Walnut store in Philadelphia. Well, 10 miles outside the city, we now have 3 floors in a building that used to be the regional Comcast headquarters. So we are now looking to become what, for example, CarMax in the United States is to cars. You go there, you buy a car, you know there's going to be no problem, that it's been looked over by experts, that's going to be backed by a warranty, and that there is a routine process for shopping, negotiating a price, buying it, and then being supported after the sale. The other thing about early days of pre-owned is that you would buy the watch, basically no promises made. There are quite a few promises when you buy from Watchbox. You have a 1-week right of return because I believe, and we believe, that if you buy a watch online, you can make a mistake. Maybe it doesn't look right, fit right. Maybe it isn't what you expected. You bought it from a photo and a video. You deserve the right to return it. No questions asked after a week. Also, warranties. Multi-year warranties offered on pre-owned watches. Our warranty is now equal to the new watch warranty of 24 months offered by most brands. And then finally, if you have a problem, we're going to take care of you because it's either something for which we have a service contract, parts, and training from the factory, or if it is like a Zeitwerk minute repeater and you're having problems with that, we're going to foot the bill under our warranty and send it back to Longa. So the idea is to take what was once very local, episodic, irregular, and non-standardized and make it global, instant, online, and highly standardized with the quality control and the after-sales service you expect when you buy a new watch. That's a big commercial. What can I say to back it up? I can say that I've actually bought, traded, sold watches through Watch You Want and Watchbox. So through our company, I have been both a spokesman and a client, and that I can't give a better endorsement.
And just quickly, I know, we don't want to get too sort of into the financials. How's business going at the moment? I mean, it's a bit of an unusual year for everyone, and I think maybe an online marketplace would be good in a COVID pandemic.
Yeah, spot on. Business is good. I mean, I'll tell you that the distribution of where the watches are going is different. Right now, we're selling a lot of watches to Asia, and Asia has done a better job of dealing with COVID than the United States has. We're still selling in the United States, but when we sell in the United States, and heck, even when we sell to Asia these days, the average price of the watch has gone up significantly. So whereas in the Watch You Want days, when we were, in a business park in Florida, we always said we were aiming to be the best in the $3,000 to $8,000 watch market. Now, we're well into 5 figures, and the watches that are selling, they might be on average around $20,000. So it's a different customer, it's a different product, the expectations are different, and whereas Watch You Want did almost no business with overseas customers, now, partly because we are open in Singapore and we are open in Hong Kong, we're doing a great deal of business there. We buy and we sell through those offices, and right now, that's where the most expensive watches are going. and it's where the pulse of the market is strongest at the moment.
Yeah, sure. And you sort of mentioned, that there's a bit of insight into, you're selling more in Asia, all that sort of stuff. Uh, are there any sort of trends or data points that the collectors or listeners would be interested in? Like, in terms of what brands are hot, what's maybe sort of cooling off, any of that sort of stuff?
Well, the weird thing is that Rolex is hot whether the watches are new or not. We
Sure.
have a new Submariner, a new Oyster Perpetual, there's a new Sky Dweller, there's been a few revisions throughout the model lines, and those watches obviously are waitlisted. We're not talking about new watches here at Watchbox, we sell used watches, but a lot of times what happens is people who are early on the wait list will sell the watch to us and they'll get, a high price that's retail or above, and then we'll sell the watch with the convenience of immediate delivery, but with an aftermarket markup. And that's kind of how things are when new watches come out. People who are early on the wait lists and don't want the watch will sell to pre-owned vendors. They'll get their money up front. We'll sell the watch above retail, but what people get for their extra money is the convenience of immediate delivery.
Mm.
What's weird is that just before those new Rolexes were being announced, people were paying close to 20,000 US dollars for the Rolex Hulk, which was a watch that retailed for under 10 grand and came out 10 years ago. So that was anomalous to me because this is a case of a watch that is nowhere near new, could be considered dated, and is selling close to twice its retail. We were seeing the same thing with the Rolex Daytona, the ceramic bezels, where you've got a watch that fundamentally hasn't changed much. A few refinements inside and outside the case and the bracelet clasp since the year 2000. That's a watch that's pretty much the same model that came out in Y2K, and yet you look at that steel model and you're talking about a $13,000 watch that can sell for up to twice that used. So this is anomalous to me. And look, if you're that guy who's got to have the watch, I'm not going to talk you out of it. You'll get your watch immediately. You'll pay a price for it. But I would always tell people to look for value alternatives. That's where you really need to consider something like the Omega Diver 300 meter, which is just as good a watch as the Submariner. And that's a watch you can buy for less than its retail when it's used. It's worth considering. I would tell people, the Nautilus is a great watch, but consider the Vacheron Overseas. Because when a Nautilus is a $33,000 watch selling for $66,000, you really have to give consideration to an Overseas that's similarly priced and, well, is going to be available right around that price used or even a little bit less. You're getting a better product. So for me, I always try to suggest value because anyone can see the most expensive and most hyped watch. You don't need to be guided to that conclusion. And if you just can't be talked out of it, hey, I'm not going to dissuade you. But I do like to try to be the customer advocate and steer people toward better value.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was my next question was sort of your feelings on the premiums and the hype, given, being you're an expert on on watches and having so much hands-on experience. And it's interesting that you kind of say seek out value because there are so many alternatives. I'm curious, you mentioned the Nautilus there. Do you think the Nautilus, even at retail, if you ignore what it resells for, do you think at retail it's a good value watch at that sort of mid-30s price point?
At about 33,000, which is where it is now after the last price increase, yeah, I think it's a good value. They put a new movement in it last year, so at least they're investing in the platform. It is a watch that is extensively handmade, and if you compare it to something like an Overseas or an Aquanaut, you will find that the finishing is a bit more delicate, fine, a bit more difficult to achieve. Some of the things like the bevels in particular on the case are very narrow, difficult to achieve artisanally. The bracelet is made, and even though again, I regret the pins and sleeves. It should be screws for the removable links. All the same, the way the bracelet is made is very impressive. And the watch is remarkably thin and versatile, and you can wear it all the time. If you just want that one watch that you're never going to take it off, the fact that it is highly water resistant, well loomed, automatic winding, and the movement itself is artisanal. You're getting a lot for your money. Like, I don't understand when I see a rose gold Bell & Ross BR05 come out and it costs as much as a new 5711. I smack my forehead. That watch made sense at 5 grand. At 32 grand, you may as well just get the Nautilus if you're on the waiting list. So, how do I define value? How versatile is the watch? How scarce is the watch? What kind of experience do you get? Will you wear it often? I think the Nautilus is a good value, but I'm not going to argue it's the class leading product. I think the class leading product in that segment is the Overseas.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the hype has overtaken that sort of class leading value and has determined, the overall
Yeah.
demand and I guess aftermarket price.
I just want to quickly shift gears. I know we're heading towards the end of our chat, Tim. Um,
Yes.
in our research, I listened to the Excellent Scottish Watches podcast where you said something that was really, really interesting, and I felt sort of really struck out to me. Don't love brands because they won't love you back. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by
Ooh.
that?
Well, it's true. For the most part, watch brands are corporate entities with transient personnel, and you fall in love with your family, your friends, maybe some close colleagues who've been with you through the wars. You'll meet with different representatives every single year at some of these brands. At the managerial level, they're bringing in executives from leather goods and champagne and cars and God knows what. Those people are in and out, possibly with bonus packages if they hit their numbers. The companies themselves, they're not family firms. You're not going to have a lasting and meaningful relationship with them, and you mean as much to them as the next check you write. So you may fall in love with a brand for its history, the beauty of its products, the appeal of its model lines, or the style of the watches. And you got to realize that that's not reciprocal and it will never be reciprocal. And while they are wonderful things to own, when you buy a Ford Mustang, you think of it as a cool car, but at the end of the day, you mean nothing more to Ford than that particular sale. And after the warranty period is done, they're done with you. So, as most of these brands are large corporate entities owned by group ownership, many of them publicly traded, trying to make a stock price and hit their earnings per share, the passion that a collector inevitably feels, because this is such a personal hobby, will never be mirrored back. And that's why, for example, I decided, look, I love Jaeger LeCoultre, but that will never be reciprocal. And no matter how many watches I buy, I'll never be dealing with the same people twice, and the company will never acknowledge me because even if I were their number one customer, the second the pocketbook closes, they're moving on to the next guy.
Yeah,
So
sure.
that's just kind of a sobering way of looking at the watch community. And if that sounds kind of soulless and hollow and leaves you feeling, a little bit depressed, I would say the good news is that other collectors will be the relationships that endure. You'll build friendships with people you meet through the watch industry, through the watch hobby, online and in person. And some of the folks who have become my closest friends are other collectors I met at SIHH or Basel World or Watches and Wonders or Watch Time New York. And that's where the relationships really, really come about. I would also say if you do want to have a relationship with a brand and matter to them, stick with independence. They're small
Hmm.
enough that some of those personal relationships really are possible. And there are folks who are independent watchmakers who I know, and I'm on great terms with them. I'm on friendship terms with them, and I've never even bought a watch from them.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it's a different scene when you're talking about independence, especially when they're small ones. I don't consider Patek an independent. Just they're an independent family-owned company, but they're also a billion-dollar company.
Sure. Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
indies, the indies, as they call themselves. So figure anything from like Moser level down to Philippe Dufour making his half dozen watches a year.
Yeah. So the low production number guys. Um, it's been a really interesting year or few years for watches. There's obviously been massive turmoil, both brought from within and without. What do you think if you trained your crystal ball on the industry for the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to look like? And do you think trade fairs are coming back or are they done now?
Trade fairs are done. I think what you'll see are events like Watch Time New York and Watches and Wonders, where you'll get a bunch of the brands together for the cost of nothing more than shipping the inventory, a few personnel, and a couple of tables. You look at the commitment to exhibiting at Basel World and the millions of franc that some brands spent there, and you realize how many small local events you can do for half the price of exhibiting at Basel. And you can literally take the watches to their consumer markets because New York City, Watch Time New York, Watches and Wonders Shanghai, Watches and Wonders Miami, Watch Time LA, these are all consumer markets. And the people who are buying the watches are there. So if you go there, Again, for the price of putting a few people on a plane, shipping some inventory, and popping up a few tables, you might get more end consumer sales and leads than you would get from exhibiting to vendors at Basel World. They just announced that there's going to be some successor to Basel World, and it's going to be all virtual. I read the press release 3 times, and I still have no idea what they're talking about.
Agreed.
It's
And
hour time or something like that, right?
yeah, I read my way through it. It was just like endless marketing cliches strung together, which is a wonderful feat of English translation, which I'm sure it is. But it also seemed remarkably hollow and almost like it's the death knell of Basel Worlds. Like you can imagine an animal in like its death throes, and this is like the final thrash before rigor mortis. So the trade shows are almost certainly dead, at least the way they used to be. But I think smaller local events, which could be as small as a Watch Time LA or as big as a Patek Grand Exhibition in Singapore, that is the future of bringing the watch to the customer. I don't think everything's going to be online. There's still a place, but there's still a place for in-person exhibitions, but they have to be to the customer, not to retailers. The thing about Basel and SIHH was that's where vendors used to buy their allotments for the year. They'd go, they would see the new watches because you couldn't see them anywhere else. Uh, you know, that kind of business to business thing can be done over the internet today. The purpose of a show now is to get to the customer.
Amazing. Well, look, it's coming from an authority like you. I think that's a really strong insight. What I want to ask as one of the final questions is who do you follow and sort of respect in the watch industry? You know, social media or otherwise. But who do you kind of look to with respect
You know,
and admiration?
people I respect in the watch industry, James Dowling. He is a Rolex expert and he's a bit of a cranky old man, but he's also sincere, no BS, and an authority on his brand. He is the kind of person you can speak to and expect absolute honesty. So he's a person I follow quite closely, and I value his counsel immensely. I also value his crankiness because it sets me straight. Um, Ariel Adams is another cranky. He's a cranky young man, but he's another no BS type of guy who has the same gee whiz reaction to watches today as he had when he first started with a blog to read when it was
Yeah.
called a blog to read back in 2007. So I follow him quite closely. He's also a personal friend, and I think as a if you're wondering who's sincere about how he presents a watch, he would definitely be a great example of a person who's always going to tell it to you straight. And I'll be honest, Jack Foster of Hodinkee, he's another guy I respect tremendously for his knowledge. And although I don't know him personally, I respect him immensely as a fellow writer who works in the space. And finally, I would also say that I have immense respect for Roger Ruger of Watchtime Magazine,
Yep.
who is a first class human being, a wonderful writer, a great enthusiast of watches, and possibly the best advocate for the Swiss watch industry you'll ever encounter in print. So he has created a community around the watch time events, and that's a wonderful way for the print media to maintain its own relevance. As we're talking about the trade shows, we're talking about the brands, we may as well talk about the media that brought a lot of us to the watch space. I think a lot of us, frankly, started with magazines. So what's their next move? I think Roger's been ahead of the game with his community events. And I can tell you, he is the definition of the guy who looks at the watch, falls in love with the watch, figures out how he's going to get the watch, and then asks what the price is. The last thing, the last thing he broaches is the price. He's all about the product and the people. So I
It's
respect him immensely.
it's really interesting. So I don't know Ariel that well, but those other guys certainly. What really comes through there is that even though it's their job and they've been doing it for a long, long time in some cases, they still clearly and demonstrably love watches. And I think that's really telling that that's sort of what you're drawn to. And I think that's a testament to that sort of that grounding in community.
Yeah, I think it's best no matter what. Because when I say don't love brands, they won't love you back, I don't mean be a cynic. I don't mean be burnt out. I just mean find other ways to love the watch hobby. And for me, that's community. And with magazines in decline, with trade shows in decline, I think it's good news that the way we'll all stick together and maintain our passion is by coming closer together in person and also via online communities.
Amazing. Great answer. Look, Tim, thank you so much for your time. What we like to do with every guest at the end of the show is ask for, a recommendation of something they've been reading, watching, listening to, and enjoying. Other ways they killed the time. Do you have anything for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge fan of comic books and classic rock. I would say on the comic book front, get into the art of Dave Stevens. The late great Dave Stevens was not prolific in the comic realm, but you've probably heard of the movie The Rocketeer from the early 90s.
Yes.
It was a comic before that. You will find the most, I would say, you can call him a virtuoso working in the comic medium. Check out The Rocketeer. Check out the work he did in his limited comic body of work and labor, and you're going to find achingly beautiful penciling and inking. And I think even if you're just a casual fan of visual arts, you're going to love it. On the classic rock front, the Blue Oyster Cult, the reason I first picked up a guitar, they haven't had an album since 2001. Well, tomorrow, their newest album comes out. And again,
How excited out of 10 are you?
I'm thrilled. Honestly, I've seen them every year, at least once a year, since I fell in love with the band in 2017. And I won't be able to see them this year for obvious reasons. We've got COVID and they're all in their 70s. But I'm getting new music from my hometown Long Island band for the first time since I was in high school, and I'm psyched. So guys, check out The Symbol Remains, the new Blue Oyster Cult album.
Outstanding. If it's a work day over there, I'm sure you'll be taking it off just to listen to it all the way through. That's great.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for your time, Tim. It's been a real treat to speak to you and to sort of get your insights on some of the nitty-gritty of watch reviewing online. We'll, of course, link up everywhere we can sort of, watch your reviews, follow you on social media, all the usual stuff. But thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Felix, Andy, thank you so much. Have a great...
Thank you, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Andy Green, that was the man, the myth, the legend, the YouTube star that is Tim Mosso of Watchbox Studios. I found that fascinating. How did you go with it?
The one and only. Yeah, really cool. Really interesting guy. His answers were awesome.
Knows his stuff.
He knows. Man, he'd be so passionate about it as well. Very cool.
And really like a good, for someone that sort of reviews on YouTube and has works for a big company, obviously, he's got a really good sort of perspective and is a really, sort of good advice. Like, it's not like, just buy the most
good sense of humor too.
Yeah. GCOH, as they say in the personal ads.
Alrighty, well, we've got people to thank.
Who do we thank first, Andy?
Well, Tim for coming on,
nice.
Always.
Good call. Smart.
Watchbox for letting him come on. But no, our sponsors. So, as always, guys, please, Inglewood Coffee Roasters, OT30, cop that sweet roast.
Get that brew.
Check out Gucci.
Yep.
I mean, that's the best way to help us. Maybe you want to send some grips our way, head into a store, hop onto their website, Gucci.com.
Yes.
Major Tom Media.
Oh, thank him. Thank him so much.
Mate. Jason, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Yep.
Thank you for following us on Instagram.
OTTHEPodcast.
Thank you for emailing us.
OTTHEPodcast @gmail.com. I got my @ in the wrong place. Gosh.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing the show. Thanks for tagging us in photos.
I've got one more thanks.
What is it?
Thank you, Andy Green.
You're welcome. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.